Okay, so in this video, we're actually going to resolve a lot of issues, a few issues that we had in the previous video. I've done some research and came up with some interesting findings, which you probably have already resolved. Since it took me a while to record this video, actually took a few days of R&R, so I'm back refreshed and ready to go. Okay, so let's just do a recap of where we left off. So let's launch this guy on the command window. Let's see, reveal and explore. Let's go up to the project folder. And then let's just run this guy. Now what I'm gonna do a gulp serve, but this time I'm gonna do the no browser switch, because everything we're doing is inside of the tenant. We do not need the localhost workbench. So there's no need to, so that no browser switch would prevent that from launching. And while that's working, here's my tenant. Let me just do a refresh here. Okay, so now let's open this guy up on the workbench for the tenant. The underscore layouts 15 workbench.aspx. Okay, let's see. This guy seems to be running. I'm gonna just slide this over so that way I can kind of see its status when we're compiling. And let's go to many contacts. Okay, so this is where we left off. So we are rendering information from the contact list. In that contact list, if you recall, if you go to site column, site contents, we just created this key contacts list here. Simple list, 2 columns, there's a title, and then there's a contact field, which is a people and group field, right? So the HR benefits and all this other good stuff that's coming from that user information list. So where we left off, if you go into the edit properties for the web part properties and adjust the count, hit apply, the count is not being adjusted. So we know we have more than 4 items in the list, and the only way that we can see the updated information is that if we refresh the browser. So if I do a refresh of the browser, then it displays the correct count. It's not the end of the world, but it's definitely not ideal as well. But I think the bigger issue that we have, that we kind of left off with, is that if you put an invalid list name, you click apply, obviously you won't see the change, but if you hit refresh, it doesn't display anything from a user perspective. That's okay. It doesn't give a message either, which is not the best thing. But if you hit the edit to edit the properties to correct this, oh yeah, fat fingered that. It's not KeyContacts 12, it's just KeyContacts. The apply button is disabled and you cannot fix your issue, right? So that's definitely an issue. So that the user is left with deleting this web part and then firing up a new instance, which is definitely not ideal. So let's go ahead and resolve it. So the first thing we want to resolve is, and I have 2 windows open here. I have a shadow copy and another monitor that's going to kind of be my footnotes along the way. So that way we're not wasting a lot of time watching me stumble trying to get my curly brackets and parentheses correct. So the first thing we need to do, let's solve the error, right? So when we put an invalid list name, we cannot the user cannot recover from that. And the best way to do that, basically what's happening is that in that error, there's section error being displayed. If you look into the console, and uncontact is cannot read properly of undefined. So basically we're passing the collection to the contact card component, but it's undefined, but we're calling the map method, okay? So let's go ahead and resolve that. Just put a little safety net there. So they're talking about this guy here. So this is actually pretty simple to resolve. So you just let's copy this guy off. Let's dump this into a local variable to where we have a little bit more control over the collection that's being mapped. So let's do. I'm gonna just do an inline if statement, conditional test. And if this is defined, then set that value that's in the properties. If not, set an empty array. And all I need to do now is come up here and change this to the local variable and save this off. Hit refresh. I just start seeing this warning. I'm not sure what's up with that. Okay, so now we hit refresh and we go into our web properties, put in the invalid name. Here we have to hit refresh again because we haven't resolved the second issue. The invalid name is there. How come it's not saving? There it is. So the invalid name is there. Now I can correct it. Hit apply. Hit the refresh. Hit the refresh again. Maybe it takes 2 refresh. Yeah, for some odd reason it doesn't save it on the first go. Let's try it now. Okay. I think I may have to fix the other one to where it's updating correctly in order for this to work. There it is. Very odd, right? Yeah, I think it's it took a couple of times, but we were able to recover from it. Okay, so now let's fix the other issue. The other issue is that once we hit apply, this guy should, the work part should be updated without having to do a hard refresh. Now, in order to do that, we have to understand how to do a lot of research on the component lifecycle. And it basically boils down to this. Currently, right now, the only thing that we're doing, we're setting the KeyContacts, which is this guy that refreshes the collection only when the component is initially mounted, and that happens. That's why we have to do a hard browser refresh. But there are hooks within the component that says if the property of this component or if the state bag of this component gets updated, and then it goes through a digest and it triggers a couple of events. One of the events that we can hook into, and this is one, and this may not be the best one, right? You can do a Google search on React component lifecycle, and when properties and states are updated, there are several events that are triggered that you can hook into. I chose this one, and I think I've seen this one in an examples, and that's why I felt comfortable with it. Is component did update. Now, the thing about component did update, it also passes in 2 parameters. You can do this with 0 parameters, or you can have it with these 2. And really, it's the previous properties in the previous state. And what you can do now is that you can compare the previous property with the current property and see if there was a change. And then you can make a decision on if you need to call an additional function. And really, that's our case here. So what I want to do is that anytime that, let's go down. So if we get the KeyContacts, the only 2 variables that really affect this REST API call is the count and the list name. And those are being passed in as component properties here. So anytime that the count or the list name is updated or is changed, we need to refresh the collection. Now, it took me a while to get to that point. I didn't write off, just say, oh, yeah, here's the fix. I went through a couple of trial and errors. Well, the first thing I did was to call this function just like this, without any if statement, without any additional logic, and I found myself in the infinite loop. And the reason for that is that the properties get set by the web part property, which in turn passes those to the components. It triggers this event. I come down and do the get context list. Well, in the get context method, this guy here triggers that event again because it changes the state. So then we'll come back here, fire, say, oh, you want to refresh? Fine. Okay, you refresh, set the state. Fire, oh, you want to refresh? Fine. So, and that's what happened. So in order to get around that, I had to play around with it a couple times, and I landed with this logic here. And previous props dot, let me do this because I'm not going to get the IntelliSense. Let me do the current property first. So this prop, which is the current property, item count, it fits not equal to the previous, meaning that there was a change, or, and the same is true for the previous state. Oh, no, just previous props, but the same is true for the other property, which is max count. So let me just copy this and then update the right property name. Oops, without IntelliSense. List name. I said max count, but it's actually list name. So only if these two, if either of these two changes, that's the only time we need to fire this guy off. All right, so that's that. And it's good that I tackle only the two that will actually require refresh, because we also have the other property that's being passed in. I think there's a total of 3. And the third one is the title, which is just passing the title of the web part. And then we're displaying that within our child component. We don't need a fresh collection when the title changes, right? So we're getting a little bit more efficient by only targeting the 2 that actually has an impact on the collection. So let me do a Shift-Alt-F. Save this off. Let's go back to our browser. I'm trying to position these so I can easily get to them and toggle between the 2 or 3. Okay, so I'm monitoring my little window here on the left and then making sure there was no issue. So now we got to refresh, and then now if I adjust this to 2, boom, adjust it to 7, boom. If I update with invalid list name, nothing. If I correct the list name, everything. If I update the title, now it doesn't seem like it refreshed, but obviously what we can do, we can come in here and say, let's just make sure, let's just log this out, right? I know, he's like, Deshaun, I believe you, keep going. All right, I just want to do this. Right, I think it's kind of cool to see things working. Refreshed the collection, and then we'll call this guy here that says component was updated. Okay. All right, so let's just save this off and let's just monitor the console. So now if I go to inspect console, I have no idea why we're getting this warning. Load resource, the server responded 404 not found. Oh, because of the info. So this is what the REST API responds like with a 404 if you're trying to go after a list that doesn't exist or it cannot recognize. Okay, so let's do contact name, hit apply. Let's clear this out. Hit apply. Okay, not found. I'm not getting the console right though, which is interesting. Hit apply. Console.log. Console.log. How come you're not writing it out? Did I refresh? Oh, maybe I didn't refresh. Oh, I did though. All right, let's try it now. Change the prompt. There we go. Component was updated, but it did not refresh. So let's just do a valid one. Let me down to the, okay. Component, refresh collection, component was updated. And that happens for that property. That happens for that property. But it should not happen for this guy. Cool. All right, sorry, my windows are not the best because it seems to be an issue trying to get to all the web part properties and display the console log at the same time. But anyway, we get the gist. So that's working as expected. We are efficient, so I think we're good to go. So that's how you fix the properties are not updating and kind of putting in some lightweight error handling. Obviously, we probably want to get a little bit more robust with the error handling, especially if you want to display a message that says um, invalid, right? If you want to capture, distinguish between a 404 versus an empty collection from the REST API call. Okay, and then display that to the user so the content manager has a hint that something in the web part properties is not correct. So that's that. So the other piece is if we take a look at this guy, we are not pulling in the profile images. Now to pull in the profile images, just to kind of recap, we took a look at some REST API calls within the hidden user information list. So if I grab this guy here, I kind of have my notepad here to kind of help me with some things to make this video goes a little bit smoother. So hold on, let me just delete that, paste. And basically what this is doing, this is just bringing back everything in the user information list. And if I do a search on a known user, so Madison as an example, there is a picture column, and then under there's a subproperty URL that's going to have exactly what we need. That's what we're after. Now, we have everything else, right? We were able to do that with projected columns from our KeyContacts REST API call, which seems to be a lookup to this guy. But now we need to pull this in. So my approach is there's a couple ways that you can do this. One, every time that because there's a for each loop or a for loop that's looping through this, or map property that's looping through this and displaying all of them. And obviously what we can do is every time we have an item, do a lookup, like an inner join, right, against that user information list, and do a REST API call. I think that's the worst solution, right? Only because I have 7 items here, I would make 7 REST API calls to the user information list. The other piece is to grab everything from the user information list, store it, and then as you loop in through this, just do a map, but you're getting everything from a single REST API call and doing all that matching and joining locally through just like a double for each, inner for each loop. It's not the best solution, but I think if we can narrow it down to be efficient with how much data we grab from the user information list, I think that would be, it would be better, right, than doing the REST API call for each one of those. So let's do that approach. So if you take a look at my notepad here, this guy here is the REST API call that we're going to make to try to make things a little bit more efficient. And as you can see here, I'm using this filter to really limit or nail down the items that I get back from the user information list. And obviously what I can do, because I'm looking at picture, and then usually for the users I don't care about or the items I don't care about, like SharePoint groups or AD groups, which are not real users that will not have a profile pic, their profile property, or their picture property will be null. And I'm trying to find an example of that here. I think I'm passing it. But anyway, so their property will be null. The problem is that when I try to put the picture property inside this filter call, REST API responded back and said, you cannot filter on the picture column. So I was like, okay, fine. So then I start looking at like the picture timestamp, the SPS picture timestamp, and that too responded back that you cannot filter on that column. So anyway, so I went through a few of them, and then I found a username which kind of follows the same scenario. So only for the users that I care about, but it puts me in a situation where sometimes I may and sometimes I may not get a picture because you may have a user that just does not have a profile photo. So I'm grabbing a little bit more than what I need, but at least filtering by username, at least I can filter on all the other noise with the SharePoint groups and AD groups and the other entries in that list that I don't care about. So just to confirm that this is working as expected, let's just make sure this is valid. Send this guy through. And this seems to be, other than the metadata, you can also do a no metadata too, right? In this call here, all data, no metadata. I think that's the call. And then send that. Wow, this is good. I pulled that one out of my hat. So, I mean, so now we can really trim it down to really get that JSON as lean as mean as possible, and really, smaller in the payload and only bring back a subset of what we need, right? And also limiting the columns. That's another thing that we did. We did a select on the different columns. So let me copy that off because I actually like the no metadata. Oh, no, no metadata is going to be a header property. Okay, we may not be able to pull that one off without adjusting some stuff. Anyway, so let's go with this. Copy this off, and let's start to create our method that's needed. So, okay, so if you look at our container component, I'm still down the pattern or the vein of container component, making all of the business logic calls. And right here, we can just make a simple private method, get user info, right? And this is going to be a business call because it's going to store all of the information that we need, in particular the restAPI URL. So I have that saved, and let's store that here. So this is going to be user information piece. Obviously, we don't want to hard code this, so we're passing that in as a property. So let me steal that from the top one. And we need to start this off with a // API. Okay. The other thing we need to do, we can reuse this get SP data. Again, that is our generic getter for SharePoint REST API calls. So just paste this guy in and then pass in the URL that we're creating for the user information. We don't need to set the state, so let's get rid of that. And get SP data. This is something that I do, especially when you have a lot of nested functions. It just helps you not kind of keep track of where you are. Let me do a Shift-Alt-F. Okay. The big difference with this guy is that we're not going to use this as a set routine. We need to pass this information back to the caller. So let's pass this back as a promise. And we're still going to stick with our string array. We don't want to type these yet. And return and return data. That should get rid of all my red squigglies. Shift-Alt-F. All right, cool. All right, I mean, it's really that simple. I mean, once you get a good pattern in place, really it's just all about, hey, this is who I want to call, and call that reusable function. And as you can see, there's scenarios where you can do it as a set routine that says, okay, I got the data, I'm gonna process it here. Whereas this guy says, I got the data and I'm gonna throw it back to whoever called me. And whoever called me is gonna be this guy. So if in the get context, I'm not 100% on nesting these two, but I think we can safely do it. But I kind of lose two things. One, nesting all of this in there, the user info, because it's part of the get context, right? Because the get context is really not complete without the picture data. So having the picture information, user profile information part of this method makes sense from a business method perspective, right? So I'm okay with that. The problem though I have is that when we call this guy, ideally you will want to call these in parallel, but I'm gonna call these sequential. So I'm gonna get contacts and then I'm gonna get user info. And the only reason for that is because I didn't do the research on the best way to make parallel AJAX calls, and then when doing like an all, when it's all done, you have both collections and then go through and doing your logic. I just didn't research that for this video, and I'm certainly not going to try to do that now. So let's just do that. Let's just do SP data, get the contacts. Once you have the contacts, call get user info, and then we'll set this to UI, fat arrow, and now we need to do our processing inside this fat arrow. Okay. The set state here, this is where we're setting the data. We can't set this yet, right? So what we want to do is make sure that we have both collections before we set that, and we want to manipulate this collection before we send it off to our container component, or our component. So in order to do that, what I need to do is I'm dealing with two collections here. So I got my data for contacts and I got my UI. I'm gonna set these to local variables, right? So let's do a let for the collection of contacts. Set that equal to the data, right? That's the first guy. And then let for collection UI, and set that equal to UI. All right, so I dump them locally. And now what I want to do, I want to map through this data, and for each item in this collection, I want to find the picture URL and set it. So I just do collection contacts, which is my new guy, map, and then let's just call this item, fat arrow, and we need to, okay, so once we do that, we need an if statement. We need to find, this is where I'm gonna have to do some searching. This is one of the downfalls of not typing this collection right here, because I know I need to find, I need to do a match, right? So I need to do, so for each item, no, I need to do a double loop, right? Now I need to do an inner loop against this guy here. So for, this is the part that sucks. I really wish that I could have found a much better way to do this. And I know that for arrays there's a filter piece, and I tried that filter, and actually from a syntax standpoint, from a coding standpoint, it looks super sweet, right? Because it really seemed like it was filtering, like, you don't know what the inner things are, but it was a one line, right? I got all it down to one line, and it didn't seem like it was doing a for loop on the surface, even though internally that's probably exactly what it does. But it just looks pretty, you know. So here I'm gonna just do I collection UI dot length and I plus plus. So yeah, if you know of a different way to do this, please let me know, because we definitely want to do things that look a little bit more elegant and are efficient, right? All right, so loop through, and what you want to say is, okay, if item, and I'm gonna guess at these, and then I'll go back and verify. Contact ID equals collection UI for this index dot ID. I think that's right. Okay. Now, if that's the case, so if I match on the ID, because I want to match on the contact ID, not the, so this is our list item, right? And this is our user information list. So in the list item, obviously those have IDs, but I need the ID for that people group field, which is contact and ID. So that's the difference between those two. That's why I have to get deep there. And then for the user information list, I believe it's just ID, but we can confirm that. So if there's a match, I need to, for the contact, and we're going to create this property, set the user info equal to this item in the array, this user information item. Now, obviously, I can pull out the dot picture and all this other stuff here and set it to, get the right variable name. Oh, that's just getting ugly. Obviously, I can dig in here and set the picture and set that there, but that kind of box you in, right? So what if there was additional information you need from that user information list? I don't want to have to come in here and touch this twice, right? Just make it pass through and make the component be the one that update the model and say, okay, now I have this additional property, now I want to display it. It really just eases the maintenance. You really minimize the number of places that you have to touch. So let's just pass them the entire object in this user info, and then they can just deal with it on their own. Again, this is business, right? We just really want to, hey, I have, to make this contact complete, I got information in many different data sources. Let me shrink it all into one. I'm gonna pass it back to you. If you want additional, you can adjust it and go from there. Do not touch me. All right. So once we set that, we do a break because we found what we were looking for. No need to loop through everything else, and we are good to go. I think. Let's do a Shift Alt F, and let's update our set state. So our state now is going to be this guy because this is the one that's been modified, not the raw data one. Is this right? Yeah, we don't need it inside the map. So after the loop, we set it. I think this is right. Okay, let's go verify some things. So let's make sure that this contact and contact ID is the right location for that. So to do that, let me just get my URL for the key contacts list. Send that off. Just thinking. Come on. Wi-Fi is pretty slow here. Okay, so contact ID. So yeah, so this is the guy that we want. So that's the right path for that. Okay, so now let's verify how we're looking, how the ID looks for the user information side. User information side, yep, ID is right there at the root, no sub property. The only sub property is going to be picture, so we're good there. Okay, cool. All right, let's just compile this to make sure we're not getting any errors. I'm gonna do a save all. Okay, now if everything is right, we still should get a render, right? Because we just appended to the collection. We didn't change the original. So all this is intact, which is refreshing, right? This guy is working. And then if we check the console, make sure there's no errors. Error name not resolved. Sweet service. Yeah, this thing throws a lot of errors. Just this view here when you work in a workbench in this way, because there's a lot of in this Chrome, right? There is a lot of O365 calls, and because we're not rendering a true SharePoint page, some of those calls do not process as expected, right? Which is fine. I mean, this is a workbench, so we can work around those as long as they're not impeding what we're trying to do. So our piece is there are no errors. Everything seems to be functioning correctly. Okay, so now let's spit out that picture URL. So if we go back, in order for the component to make sense of this guy here which we just added, we have to update the model. So now if I go to the model, let's just call this user info, and then we're going to set this to a type user info, and we have to create that type, export interface user info. Okay, and that coincides with this guy here. So this is our user info. We need ID, picture, and username. ID. Picture is going to be a subtype, so we have to create that. Picture. We'll come back and define it, and then user capital N name. This is just going to be a string. All right, so let's do the picture. And I think in picture we just have description and URL, right? Picture, description, URL. Okay, so I think this should be happy. I'm watching my build window there. Everything looks good. And now if you go into the contact card, it may be as simple as, I mean, this is sweet. I mean, once you get a good model in place, the maintenance should be very straightforward. User info, picture, URL. That's it. We didn't have to touch the key contact. We went straight to the child. Everything else is passed through, really minimizing the maintenance. So now we can go back and add additional fields as needed. We may have to update our select statement, right? Because we're getting efficient with the username. So our business call to grab user info, we have to update that restAPI URL. But everything else that we don't have to touch, update the model, update the child component that actually uses the information, and we're done. Maintenance becomes a cinch. I really like a great design. So let's do a refresh here. And there we have it. All done. All done. So that's our guy. And if we go to here, update to 8, done. Update to 1, done. All done. And that's it. The other piece, and this is a red herring, and actually I wanted to wrap up this series with this video, but we ran into an issue with the additional information here, right? Because we have phone number that we're not displaying. And in order to do that, let me just explain what the issue is, and then I'll do more research and verify the fix. I think I found the fix, but it seems hacky, but if it works, we'll go with that. But basically the problem is, obviously what we can do is come in here and adjust our CSS here, right? And ideal, what I would want to do is come back and say, hey, I want to display this guy here, but for some odd reason the component has this display none flagged, and I want to display it. So all I want to do is come in here, copy it. This is under Hello World. Obviously, we would have to update this to the name of our web part. And they have these nested, so that way, you know, the styles you define here will not affect anything else on the page in the event container, which is widely used, especially in the Bootstrap or responsive design framework, row widely used. You're not affecting those other things. So if you have it wrapped within your web part class or parent class, all these styles will only apply to that web part. So ideally, what I would want to do is just come in here, do a .ms persona and block. I'm sorry, getting ahead of myself. Display block, right? But the problem is that once I save this and then try to use it, this guy gets a suffix added to it because all of our class names are renamed. And in this scenario, we're using that ECB, whatever. So you can see this. So this will never work because this, like if this had that suffix on there, obviously it would match, but now it's a mismatch. So I'm not affecting anything based on that class name. So there is an article out there that says that, you know, there is a way to turn this off. It's not a switch. Like their solution to turn this off is to hack into removing the module name, because I guess the gulp process or whatever process that's, you know, compiling the SAS and converting it over to a module, if it doesn't find what it's looking for, it just doesn't do the renaming. And then you have to, in the web part here, instead of bringing in the styles, which I think we end up removing to make this thing lean to me, but instead of bringing in the styles, you do a require and then the module name .css, and nowhere in here I can see the CSS, so that must be like a deploy or a build process that creates the CSS file. So again, it seems kind of hacky because you're referencing files that you cannot explicitly see, and you're kind of like renaming some out-of-the-box files, so it's not explicit at what you're doing. Ideally, we will want to have a switch, something like this, where it says, yeah, by default, when you type in the comment field or the text field, for the web part property, automatically updates without you even having to click apply. If you want to turn that off and need an apply button to make things a little bit more efficient, here's the switch. And I think that's the ideal way. We really need a switch to turn off the CSS class name renaming. Okay, so I'll do some more research on that. I mean, if we have to bow down to that one or concede to that little hack piece, we will. And then I'll update the user voice. I'll go out there into the user voice or to the community and see if I can add an entry if anyone talked about that, whatever, just so that we can point that out. But either way, I mean, as far as the web part and displaying picture information, I think this is it. I'll see what I can come up with as far as formatting, and then I think we'll wrap up this series and then move on to the next one. I actually have another challenge that I've been presented with, and I accept it. So let's wrap this up and move to the other one, learn some other cool stuff. All right, so one more video. I'll let you know what I find out with the styling.